Welcome. I'm here with Fahed Essa he's a co-founder and CEO of Mayv and coming in from us from California. Welcome, Fahed. Happy to have you here.
Thank you, Jeremy. Happy to be here.
So let's first start out and just talk a little bit about Mayv. People probably don't know the name right off of hearing it. What is Mayv? What industry are you playing in? And then let's dig into a little bit your entrepreneurial journey.
Yeah. So Mayv is a digital health therapeutic focused on chronic pain. We're really addressing the emotional and psychological well-being of patients living in chronic pain, conditions that are really kind of dire and cause a lot of depression, a lot of pain to patients beyond 3 months. So really kind of addressing a patient population that has been forgotten by the medical system.
So when you say a
Sorry.
digital health therapeutic, what does that actually mean?
So think about it this way. Um, an app, a program, anything delivered a, through a digital medium that guides patients through a therapy. And that's kind of really kind of definition of what a digital therapeutic is. How what we are specifically is a program that teaches patients the basics of science and the science of stress and pain and how to manage it. And then really allows them to learn different modules, whether it's Tai Chi, restorative yoga, self-compassion, identity. There's a whole suite of tools that can help patients, and it's really allowing them to figure out what works for them.
So, obviously you're looking at people that are in chronic pain, probably over 3 months, and you're trying to find a solution for them to be able to manage it. How'd you end up getting into this field? And then we'll kind of dig into a little bit
Yeah.
more about the company and a little bit more about what you do. But it sounds like a unique space to be. I usually somebody that has a passion around that has some experience to it. So I'm just
Yeah.
curious.
So I've lived in pain for the last 20 years, and that's specifically why I've started Mave. So I broke my femur playing soccer or football, depending where in the world and what you call it.
Yeah.
But ultimately broke my femur completely in half and had 3 surgeries to fix that. And we fixed the my leg, and my femur is completely intact. However, I've lived in pain ever since. So there's a complete dissonance between the actual injury and the pain that I've suffered from for the last 20 years. And that's the exact problem. When I was growing up in Kuwait and looking for therapies, I had 2 things that were open to me: was surgeries or a whole cocktail of drugs that are available.
Right.
But that wasn't the path I wanted to take. And it's only when I moved back to the States that I realized there's a whole bunch of modalities that could help, whether it was chiropractors, whether it's CBD, whether it was mindfulness, and a whole bunch of others. But that didn't weren't available to me in Kuwait. And it's exactly how most Americans live, where they don't have access to these services. And so we're always revert to what we have at hand, which is drugs and surgeries that are ineffective. And so I was doing my master's in public health at Berkeley, and that's where I started kind of researching what patients are needing, patient perceived needs, and I opened Pandora's box of unmet needs. Patients really did not want drugs. They hated the side effects.
Now,
Patients
are
were
you seeing that? Because there was, obviously a big trend here in Florida around pain management clinics, and obviously there's a crackdown on that, and you're an alternative to the just getting drugs peddled on you. Are you seeing that idea of moving away from that pain management clinics to trying to find holistic versions? Was that an opportunity you saw, or was it more just because you sought out for yourself and it worked, and that's why you kind of jumped into the space?
Yeah, it's a two-sided thing. So I saw what it worked for me, which gave me confidence that there is another path beyond drugs. But
Yep.
you have to look at the US healthcare system. The US healthcare system consumes 80%, 80% of the world's supply of opioids.
Yeah.
That's 4% of the world population that consumes 80% of prescriptions globally. That is a lot because we treat pain the wrong way. Pain is excruciating. Nobody should be living in pain. So sure, we do take opioids, but that's a short-term fix. Pain is a cycle. Our brain learns how to produce pain, and we really need to address it in a holistic manner, where we're trying to break the cycle of pain. We're trying to not only reduce the feelings of pain, but reduce it from coming back again. And that's where a holistic perspective takes play into understanding that pain is so much more complex than a symptom. And when we treat it with opioids, we're trying to mask the communication language. And I know this is a little complex. Let me dumb it down a little bit or make it
Yeah.
a little simpler. When you put your hand on a flame, your hand is feeling heat. However, your body's converting that, or your brain is converting that into a pain signal to move your hand away from the flame. And that's what pain is. It's a communication method of your body. Now, when we mask that with drugs or opioids, we're kind of not responding to the underlying cause of why the pain exists, but we're really just masking the language, that your body's language, or putting the mute button on your body. And that's the really kind of the way we need to look forward is we really need to understand what this pain is coming from, why it's being produced, and heal it from an underlying kind of perspective or the root cause perspective.
That makes sense to me. So it's more of, instead of, especially chronic, and I think you kind of start in the beginning, you want to get rid of your pain, but at a certain point, you want to figure out what is driving that pain. You don't want to just hide it forever, that side. Now, a lot of
Exactly.
people end up finding either for themselves some type of solution to make their life better, or a passion that they feel like is important. But most people don't try to move that into a business and try to change that into a company. Can you just
Mhm,
talk a little bit about, you saw yourself in pain from breaking your leg to now all of a sudden you got it fixed, but you're still in service and you figured out your own ways to manage through the pain. But most people won't make that leap of faith going, I should start a company from it. How,
mhm.
how did you start and think about going, this should be a business? Where did your mind come from to go, I think this should be something that I can be able to bring to other people, not just,
Mhm.
tell people or just become a doctor, but really, and let me start a company to be able to try to touch as many people with what I've learned.
So it comes from research and figuring out what the problem is, and that's and I have always had the entrepreneurial bug. I've started two companies before back home. I like challenging the status quo. Like challenging the existing systems or how we address problems today. And that doesn't come from a corporate perspective. It has to come from an entrepreneurial place. Innovation does come from it starts with one person and then two, and then you kind of start propelling this change. Uh, and so I started doing research. I was writing my thesis for my master's in public health, and that was the basis of where it kind of all stemmed out of. And I started really uncovering that we're trying to fit patients into boxes that are averages. But people are different. We're a diversity of biologies, a diversity of people, and there are a diversity of solutions. There's no one size fits all, but there's a multitude of approaches. And the way the medical system is trying to fit us is a linear path. You try what it's a step therapy. You try one thing, it doesn't work, then you go to the next thing. It doesn't work, then you go to the third thing. It doesn't try to understand our lived experience, our biologies, our diversity. And so I saw a mismatch of what patients want and what the system is providing. And as I pivoted my research into reimagining chronic pain care, I discovered that a multimodal system, one that fits that diversity of experiences and allows patients to experiment to see what works for them, is what's needed from a patient perspective. And I had that bug in me. So I was like, let's start it. And I met Steve, my co-founder, and I was like, let's do it. Let's and I was doing my MBA at the same time at Berkeley. So I was like, okay, like this is
You were
um
also in business mode too, thinking about the company.
yeah.
So how did you find your co-founder? Because I think people are always struggle with. They might have an idea, they might start thinking through it. It's a lot easier sometimes to brainstorm and think through ideas with someone else, right? Talking out
Mhm,
loud and kind of testing your theory with somebody. But then other
mhm.
people don't want to bring in partners. So talk to me a little bit about how you ended up finding a co-founder and why you decided to have somebody as a partner.
So it's I've seen this a lot in Kuwait where people don't want to bring in partners because they want 100% of the pie. And that greed of wanting like 100% of a small pie is like is ridiculous because you can have 50% of a pie that's much larger. And that's really kind of the way to partner and why to partner. So I met my co-founder at business school. He was at business school a year below me in at Berkeley, and a year older than I in age. But we met having a conversation around kind of design, and we just clicked. And I kind of gave him my spiel and pitched him my idea. He wanted to kind of try something new, try the entrepreneurial route, wanted to change people's lives, and it was really kind of the mission driven approach that really kind of that pulled him in.
Yep.
And we hit it off, and we tried it out over the summer, tried working together, and then we co-founded the company after the summer, of working together for a couple of months, and then the rest was history. I really, really kind of thank him for kind of giving me a try, because
Yep.
alone, it's really hard doing things alone. Um, it's the loneliest thing you'll ever do, is building a startup. So
Yep.
having someone there is super important.
Yeah, I've had partners in some businesses and partners in not. There's a book I read called Rocket Fuel. I don't know if you ever read it at all. It has to do with two types of leaders, a visionary and an integrator. And they talk about having like Steve Jobs and Wozniak, or Gates and Paul Allen, and how if you're going to have co-founders or two main partners, having different skill sets that could be able to help drive. And
Mm,
I've been in a business before where both of my partner and myself were visionaries, and there was this
mm,
constant friction because we were both visionaries. And then I've had
mhm,
another great partnership where I was a visionary, but they are phenomenal at integrating, and I wasn't great at details, and they were great at the operation side, and it's been a very successful partnership.
mm.
As you guys have started to be able to build, any advice you would give to people that are listening around building a successful partnership like you are?
Um, I would say exactly like you said it, is finding complementary skill sets. Steve and I are exactly the opposite in different kind of skill sets. Like I'm organized physically, but mentally I'm a mess.
Yeah.
He's like in his like workspaces would be a mess, but mentally he has everything organized, and it's like a library in his head, and it's beautiful how we work together and complement each other's kind of weaknesses and strengths. And that's what you're looking for in a partner, but also in a partner, somebody you can laugh with, somebody you can talk to, somebody you can be emotional about, and be really honest about kind of your expectations and your needs. Like, I worry about his family, his kid, how his relationships are going. Um, and he worries about me. And it's really kind of having that partnership, that friendship, the caring for each other beyond just the business and the success of the business, that really kind of creates a successful partnership, I would say.
No, I 100% agree with you. And I think most people minimize the caring and fun aspect, right? I mean, you're going to spend a lot of
Hmm.
time with them. There's going to be a lot of things you disagree on, and if you don't have that level of caring and respect, but also that you just enjoy being around each other, it's hard to be able to
Hmm.
talk through issues.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier that you've started two other companies back home. I'm assuming when you say home, you mean Kuwait or you mean here?
Yeah. Yes. Go ahead.
So I'm actually curious on this. Is Kuwait an entrepreneurial type community? Would you say it's similar to the US on that side? And it's moved, I think the US has moved more entrepreneurial than it was, 30,
Yeah.
40 years ago. Or do you think it was more of just kind of family that got you into entrepreneurship? Talk a little bit about what got you to
Yeah.
really start two companies before. You look like a relatively young guy. So
Yeah.
you have two companies you started already.
Uh,
But clearly you had that bug in you for a while.
yeah. So I think coming from a developing world, everything's entrepreneurial. Like, there's a lot of room to grow. So the world is not just kind of set. Like, even within entrepreneurship, there are models of replicating what works in the US or in the Western world, and coming taking it to the Eastern world, and replicating business models there. Like, I learned that in business school. I was like, oh, that's a thing. I thought those were just copycats. But so there is an entrepreneurial kind of culture, a very strong and entrepreneurial culture. There's a lot of government funding to support entrepreneurs, and there's a lot of movement towards starting your own business and starting and changing the way we do things in Kuwait. Now, my first startup was failed. Went belly up. It was trying to digitize billing between between hospitals and insurance companies. Lo and behold, insurance companies didn't want to reduce their cash cycle or reduce their or pay pay their bills earlier. So we kind of got bottlenecked by insurers and third party administrators, and that was not a success. But I learned, and we learned fast. And my second startup was a juice cleanse business. We started vertically integrated into farming, uh, provided like healthy juices, foods, and that still exists actually, and I'm still a partner in that startup. So it's really about finding opportunity, but there's a lot of opportunity in developing worlds. We're developing, so there's a lot of things to be fixed. There's a lot of things to work on. So I think the environment there is really prone to entrepreneurship.
You seem to focus your entrepreneurial efforts in the healthcare space. Any advice you'd give to somebody looking in that industry, whether it's on the holistic side that you've kind of come through, and that resources that they might be able to find, or and obviously people look at healthcare as a very profitable and lucrative area that's going to be continue to grow. So you get a lot of entrepreneurs wanting to create something in that
Mhm.
space. But any thoughts or advice you would give to somebody that's starting to look in that area?
Yeah. So like coming into healthcare, I I got like I loved healthcare initially since did cancer research when I was younger. I did T cell therapy research. That was my goal, is to help people, and to first have a proper mission and a proper mission of why you're entering healthcare. If it's just for the money, you'll probably fail, because healthcare is more of about humans, about helping people. If that is your goal, then profitability will come and you will succeed if your mission is aligned with the wellness of people. Um, but second is understand who's going to pay for your product. If you figure that out first, and then everything else kind of plays out. Because, for example, like we're thinking about kind of from a digital health therapeutic going direct to consumer, we're kind of pivoting now to going to employer plans or health plans or XYZ, but it depends on who the payer is, because the metrics they want to see are different, and it dictates the studies we're going to be running and
Hmm.
the pilots we're going to be doing. So if it's the NIH, we're looking at opioid dependency. If it's employer groups, we're looking at days off work. And if we're looking at health plans, we're looking at costs. So there are three different metrics for the same solution, for the same patient population. But you got to start understanding who's going to pay for your product to start molding everything towards that. And that's something that I learned the hard way. So
No,
that'd be a piece of
I love the
advice.
idea of starting out at who's actually going to pay for your product and then building key metrics associated with the people that are going to do it that you can actually track your business. I think that's a great approach. And so you mentioned a couple areas of how you were thinking about the different sectors that you could approach, whether it's direct to consumer or looking at the different employers with their groups. Can you just talk a little bit about where you might find resources or how you're starting to navigate to figure that stuff out? Like, how are you even thinking about pivoting to a different marketplace on it? Where are you
Mm.
getting that advice? Support? Is it just reading periodicals? Is it, just Googling? Is it talking to people in the industry? Is it, and obviously we don't go to trade shows or anything like that anymore.
Yeah. So I would say I, s- I just graduated my master's in public health. So I got a good 2 years of like teachings around kind of the healthcare space. So I
Yep.
feel like that was my number one resource. But these resources exist. So you can find them online. You can start learning about the healthcare industry, how it operates, payers. But first and foremost, talk to other entrepreneurs. I think that's the best resource, because, first of all, it's a lonely process, right?
Yep.
So anybody that wants to talk to me, I'm happy to talk to. It's like, let's have a conversation. This is
Right.
like other people. But other things that come out is these ideas didn't come out of isolation for me. Like I didn't think about them. Like it's really kind of talking to other people that are that pointed out, they'd be like, "Have you thought about this? Does this sound like a sound decision?" And that conversation of questioning my assumptions allows me to kind of further dive in and dig deeper into these questions. So, like, I was having a conversation with a CEO of a digital accountable care organization, And he's like, dude, and I was just pitching him my idea, and it was an introduction of a friend of a friend.
Yep.
And he was like, dude, let's pilot it with our program. Let's see if that works on us. But there are metrics that we need versus what you would go for employers. So it's really having these conversations with entrepreneurs, and they'll guide that conversation, and they'll help you through that process and give you those resources that are specific to your needs.
Yep.
But healthcare is deep and wide, so like there's a lot out there.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that's good advice. And I think most people are hesitant to reach out to successful people or business owners because they know they're busy people. But oftentimes you'll be surprised how a nice note and just a quick ask for a few minutes will actually go that you can pick somebody's brain before you get into an industry or as you're doing research. This is, you
Mm.
did a lot of research in the space before you decided to start a business in it. I think, during that time where you're deciding in if you want to start a new endeavor, reaching out to people is a great way to go. You talked about resources to help you in the industry. Is there people that were influential early in your life that helped impact you on whether it's the entrepreneurial side or even just the fact that that to be to be successful, what most people would categorize as successful and running your own business and having some flexibility?
Honestly, like I always reflect to my parents, and I know that's a kind of a cliche answer,
Yep.
but what I've seen, kind of, for example, from my dad. My father lost his father was murdered while he was in college. The guy was a refugee during the Gulf War, and jumped from industry to industry. So he comes in and kind of fixes companies, or what I've seen him do. And I remember him entering, never worked in oil or gas, and becoming the managing director of an oil company and turning it around. I was like, Dad, you don't know nothing about this company, about oil. He's like, I can learn. And this is him at 60. And I'm like, the guy always wanted to learn, and always was open to learning, and always knew his capacity and what he knew and want and his limits, and always had people around him that gave him advice. And that's kind of my role model from that perspective. From another perspective was my mom, who was an immigrant to Kuwait in the 60s. She was also a refugee. She suffered 5 cancers back to back.
And when you
She's
say
a
refugee, you mean from the Gulf War when Iraq
g-
and Kuwait, or
yeah, she's Syrian. So yeah, from the Gulf War when Iraq entered Kuwait. So
yeah,
we fled during we fled to into the desert, and kind of were found by Saudis and taken to the refugee camp, and went down to her father, who lived in Riyadh, um, my grandfather back then. So
yeah,
there's a lot to see, and to see the strength and perseverance and the resilience of my parents through a lot of tough times. Really made me suck it up. Like, I can't complain right now. Like, they've done a lot to kind of allow me to kind of get my education, to allow me to grow into who I am, and to learn that I know jack shit. That a lot of people know a lot more, and to be humble, and to ask when you don't know.
yeah. I gotta imagine that any of the setbacks you get from a business perspective are somewhat subdued when you put things in perspective.
Mhm.
From what you saw your parents go through, or how old were you during that time?
I was like 5.
Okay, did you remember it at all or no?
So I remember certain parts. So, like, for example, when the Gulf War happened, we were all like over like 100 people were in my grandmother's basement. And I thought that was just the best slumber party ever. I was like, "What?" Like, I was like, 100 people? All of them were staying? I was like, "Let's do this." So I remember bits and parts of like, "Oh, this was fun." But then I kind of looked back and I was like, "Oh, that was not fun."
Right.
But that was a whole situation of but yeah, so there's certain parts we fled to London, and to Saudi Arabia, then London, and then came to California, and established ourselves here for about 6 months, because my dad wanted to keep us in school.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah.
Yeah. So, so let's fast forward then and start going into it. So now you had got to see. It's interesting as you just say it. I just think about it. How resilient kids are, right? You're like excited about a slumber party, and meanwhile, the adults are probably freaking out at that time. Like, I was just thinking, these kids are just so resilient. It's great. Um, so then, you start fast forwarding, you obviously put things in perspective on that. And now you have a number of different opportunities that probably come your way, just from connecting with people at grad school to, starting to know people as the different entrepreneurs. Can you talk a little bit about how you decided what opportunities to pursue? Because, we have a lot of listeners that are, maybe happy in their job. They might have 3 or 4 business ideas, but they can't figure out which opportunities to pursue. You've gone through 3, and one you still have going with the juice cleanse, and Mayv you're going through now. I'm sure you had 10 other ideas that you didn't run with. How are you?
Yeah,
How do you
yeah.
determine what
So
opportunity?
I just try to imagine myself doing that for 10 years, doing whatever I wanted to do. So I came up with an idea about while I was at business school, which I kind of pursued for about 3 weeks until I realized it was around insurance and the cannabis industry
Yeah,
and putting it on a blockchain or whatever, something around that. And I was like, do I see myself running an insurance company in 5 years? I was like, hell no. I don't want to work in insurance. Like that's not
you
where
did
I
hit all
see
the
myself.
buzzwords though with cannabis and blockchain, and
Yeah, yeah,
technology.
yeah. Yeah. But I
Sounds
was
like
like,
a
I don't,
company that can get funded.
yeah, yeah. But it didn't excite me.
Yeah,
It wasn't something that I saw myself doing. So that's my first kind of measure of, do I want to be doing this in the future? The second would be, is there the right team? Do I believe this is the right team to tackle this problem? Is Are they invested beyond just profits? Is there heart in this?
yeah,
And third, is there a market opportunity? And is it investable? Is like the, the thing is it's like, before Airbnb existed, investors would have been like, oh, this is a stupid idea. Before the iPhone existed, they would say it's a stupid idea. So there is investability. I don't think I'm the genius that is going to create a new Apple, the new iPhone. So you need to fit in certain boxes to investors, and that's kind of one of the problems that we were facing, is we didn't fit investor boxes, and that's something, a learning I've learned today,
yeah,
is if you're going to investors, they need to fit you into a bucket, and if you don't fit that bucket, they're not going to invest.
yeah.
So thinking about that and investability and kind of being able to raise capital.
So, a couple more questions for you. Tell me about a favorite failure in your career. I know everybody says I don't have any failures. I learned from everything like that. But in general, a setback that you felt helped redefine on how you thought about either yourself, your career. Maybe it doesn't even have to be that big. Maybe it's just an interesting story. But one of your favorite failures.
Yeah, I think I fail every day. I failed, and I like, my first startup was a failure. It was a failure on strategy. It was a failure on conversation. It was on having conversations with partners. But I think that what I learned most of that failure is bringing all stakeholders to the table and really kind of designing around not what your idea is, but what the people, the participants in this industry, the people you're building a product for, want. So, for example, we were working with insurance companies and hospitals. I really cared about what the hospital was doing. So I really sat with the hospital and the billing department and the financial department and structured a product that made their life easier. But I never included the insurance company there. And we included them in the first conversation. They were like, yeah, go ahead and we'll kind of plug it in. But within the design and development, I didn't do that. And I think that was the failure for me. Now, today in building Mayv, we're building it for patients, and we were going to direct to consumer initially. So we had patients be on the board, design our product, test our product, test our program, tell us what they want. We employed over 17 different people that have had chronic pain, that have lived with chronic pain. And to us, that is very important. And that was our learning from that. Now that we're pivoting to going to employers, we're starting to have conversations early. Like, what do you want to see? What are the metrics you want to see? How can we build this to fit your needs? And that's kind of what my first failure kind of taught me that I'm trying to implement today.
So it goes back to what you said beforehand, is really understanding who your end client is and what it is that they're actually buying. What is it they're looking for?
Hmm.
And you could tell that unfortunately you had to have a rough experience to figure that one out. But hopefully it leads to a lot of successes afterwards. What was your most memorable day in your career that you can go through? It doesn't have to be with Mayv or anywhere else, but is there a certain memorable day you have?
It was 4 or 5 years ago, maybe more, but the FDA approved T cell therapy as for cancer treatment. And that is research I was working on at the Worcester Institute in a lab when I was an undergrad and wrote my undergraduate thesis on. And I got goosebumps. I was like, shit, something I was working on so long ago now is in market as the most personalized and the newest form of cancer treatment. And it just gave me goosebumps. I was like, yeah, this is so far back. I probably did nothing to help it, but I felt like it was it just made me proud. I was like part of this movement to get something out and on the market and approved as a and because I wanted to cure cancer. That was my goal graduating high school. I wanted
Yeah.
like to save the world. And then I went to school and realized there's more than one cancer. And I was like, okay, this is too hard. But so for me, I was like, okay, at least I did something
Right,
to
right.
satisfy that urge.
That's awesome. I think you see a big pivot in the marketplace where people want to build businesses. People that have entrepreneurial spirits, but they really want to do something that's impactful. And you give an example just now of an experience you had from school that you saw the impact and the work you're doing actually play off. But then you also listen throughout the conversation today. It's obvious that your business is something you're passionate about, that you believe actually makes a difference for people and helps people out. Oh, and by the way, hopefully you build a good, successful company that you do well with.
Mhm.
But knowing that it's something you actually are passionate and enjoy about, than opposed to an insurance company doing blockchain, it doesn't sound as sexy to be able to do it. So hopefully people saw that. And I think the other big thing took out of this conversation was around really knowing that end client and what was important to them and what they're paying for, as a way to be able to determine, almost like a filter. Are you building the business for yourself or because what you think the
Mhm.
problem is, or really for the end user on it? And hopefully people heard that from our conversation. Um, if people do, and I know we spent a lot of time on the business owner side, but if people do have questions around chronic pain and they actually like, hey, I love the business side, but I want to learn more about actually what Mayv does. Where do they find you at? How do they be able to learn more about how they might be able to use Mayv to help them out?
Yeah, they can go to mayv.co, Mayv.co, download our app on the App Store or on the Google Play Store. Uh, it's free. Our resources are all free to everybody with chronic pain. So, and that's one of the things that we really establish ourselves. We lead with a giving hand. So, like, use our services, use our resources, use our app. We want you to benefit before we ask you for anything in return. This is a patient population that is pronged, that is sold to too much because people are preying on your need for relief. So I personally have my own moral grounds. I display it in my business kind of morality. And for me in life, I lead with a giving hand, and the same thing in business. I lead with a giving hand. I want to offer help before I ask for anything in return.
No, I love even the concept of leading with a given hand. I had an awesome conversation. I appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching the Upreneur podcast, and don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe, and share this with anybody who you think needs to hear it.